Sometimes I find myself at an odd place in the anime community. I tend to love a lot of the popular things and by no means would make it want to look like I'm the type of person who dislikes things just because they're popular. Although I still find myself disagreeing heavily on the opinions of the anime community as a whole. From something as simple as missing the whole point of Attack on Titan, at least the 4th season, that being the idea that there are two sides to a story, but there's no justifiable side when it comes to war. More on that in a future video maybe. As I was saying, the anime community seems to have opinions, small or big, that I'm just appalled at. Generally, I think I'd be labeled as an older fan, the equivalent of a Gen 1er from Pokemon, but instead of saying Krabby is the best designed Pokemon, I would say One Piece is the best instead. The reason I bring this up is because I don't find myself enjoying the newer anime as much. It's not entirely the nostalgia, although I try to keep myself as unbiased as possible. I just feel like the newer anime tend to be less creative in terms of like taking risks, although I still enjoy them extensively. Like if we think about it, like 2 generations ago, Dragon Ball Z was the father, but I guess now it's more of a grandfather of shonen. And but as a grandfather, its influence isn't as noticeable as it once was with the previous generation. All of our lovely protagonists, who are idiots with a heart of gold, who can eat a lot and somehow with an IQ of 23 manage to become a genius in combat, aren't the standard. And I think that's possibly one of the better things. But like now, as we move to a generation that's influenced by like One Piece, Bleach, and Naruto, it's quite obvious. The inspiration feels very heavy, and inspiration's always going to exist. There's no such thing as an original thought, as everything you create in your mind is just an amalgamation of everything you experience formed in new ways. As with all of human innovation, we tend to stand on the shoulders of giants. And with this fairly long intro, all I want to say is that when it comes to the new generation, I love, and I mean I fucking love, Black Clover. And before we cue in the intro, I just wanted to share a quote with you to give you an idea what the video is about. My theory has always been that if we are to dream, the flatteries of hope are as cheap and pleasanter than the gloom of despair. A quote by Thomas Jefferson. And I think he knows what he's talking about, to be honest. While he was hoping to found the free land of America, the far preferable gloom of despair he talks about was experienced by his 600 slaves. Yeah, go figure. The dichotomy of hope and despair is a powerful theme used in a story to convey willpower and evoke emotion. Like everything in this world, it's only a matter of perspective. Some view hope as a beacon for all to be fulfilled and motivated by. Others view hope as a fool's dream. Much like Icarus, they'll fly too high and they'll lose their wings and fall crashing down to earth. Just remember, everybody on Mount Everest was once a very motivated person. And while some view despair as an endless pit to fall into, others view despair as a ground to stand on and prevent them from falling into the prospect of hope. This mindset is clinically known as major depressive disorder. All jokes aside, when it comes to our perspectives on this world, it goes without saying that there's no objectively correct answer, though just pondering the question of despair and hope allows for greater insight into the theme and how we perceive reality. Each story can tell their own tale of this dichotomy and provide their own subjective answer. In this video, the theme of hope versus despair will be discussed in detail, particularly in reference to a single battle that encapsulates how great of an effect this theme has on a story as a whole. In Black Clover, there's 3 leaves of the clover, as represented by a theme in the story. These are namely faith, love, and hope. Each theme is masterfully written and woven into the story, used as a motivation for both major and minor characters. However, no theme is as important to the protagonist and to the story as a whole than the theme of hope versus despair. Using what I believe to be the greatest battle in Black Clover as a focal point, the Black Bulls versus Vetto, the theme of despair will be examined throughout this video. Hey, I just wanted to interrupt this video to say that if you're enjoying this video of my opinions on anime, you'd love to hear my podcast, which includes me and a group of friends tackling different subjects relating to anime and really anything that's on our mind at the time. It's called the Moontails Anime Podcast, and I would love to see you there. Check the links in the description. It's only natural to center a discussion of hope and despair with the antagonist that represents both in such a poetic way. Vetto, whose epithet literally is the despair, and can we just take a moment to consider how badass of an epithet that is? But anyways, Vetto is an elf who throughout his life was seen as empathetic, warm-hearted, and kind. I wonder what went wrong for him to get an epithet like that. Well, just back to his childhood, he was really loved by animals and seen by everybody for his kind heart, and was even said to be the personification of hope in the eyes of Licht. Seeing the flashback after already seeing who he had become was like such a jarring transition. Like a character who's known for his violent, malicious, and vindictive nature would have such an opposite childhood. And I guess you could say this was all before the Fire Nation attacked. I mean, wrong series, the Elf Massacre, which not only changed Vetto himself, but all the elves who were attacked and killed by the humans, leaving them with this inherent hatred due to their oppression. Having Vetto, the embodiment of despair, once be a hopeful boy who loved and was loved by the world, allows for an amazing foil for our protagonist Asta, who is our embodiment of hope. This foil allows us to compare him to a possible future of Asta where he is defeated by the world, where he abandons what he holds most dear, his hope. Vetto goes beyond this though, not just abandoning his hope, but determining to make others feel misery and fear, and of course, despair. Vetto's character change made him the vindictive and malicious person he would once become. Just as Asta spreads the message of hope and perseverance, Vetto spreads his message of despair and agony. Choosing despair is not exactly synonymous with admitting defeat. At least that's the case for Vetto. It's choosing to deny the ideals of hopes and dreams for the realism of the world provides. I guess a modern equivalent, well, shouldn't say modern, like a real world equivalent would be a nihilistic ideal taken to an extreme. The world is a cruel place filled with atrocity and tragedy. Each individual has their own path and their own obstacles that they must go through, and for some, in order to be motivated to go on and achieve the impossible, they cling to the ideal of hope. However, for others, and that is the case of Vetto, the despair, they choose to abandon this hope in favor for embracing the cruel reality we all have before us. Embracing this cruelty, embracing the tragedy, embracing the misery, embracing the agony. It's a different motivation. It's not exactly admitting defeat, at least not in their eyes. This, to them, is triumph, and this is Vetto the despair. Vetto himself, being a great antagonist who was overwhelmingly powerful in his message and in his battle prowess, was set up perfectly. It displays how each person battles their very own internal despair on the path to hope in a literal and figurative manner. Not one time during the battle does any of the Black Bull, or Sea people even, admit defeat. Every time they're knocked down, they simply get back up, and if they can't, they still look adamantly at Vetto, refusing to succumb to his despair. This irritates and of course infuriates Vetto as he constantly tries to break their spirits and steal away their hope, even telling them things like, "Insects like you do not get to believe in hope," and repeatedly exclaiming for them to despair. The siblings Kahono and Kyoto, or however you pronounce them, it's funny that I remember more what Vetto did to them than I remember them as characters. Anyways, they were a singer and dancer character, I believe, who were both shown glimpses of like complete horror when Vetto took away their dreams by crippling them both. Yet, even still, if all they could do was stare back with perseverance and intensity in their eyes, that's what they did. That is the meaning of hope, to persevere even when all is lost. Vetto as a symbol of despair is used so perfectly in this role to show how much each character has grown. Noelle, who had been a timid and uncertain child, overcomes this and gains confidence to wield her magic without fear of failure. Finral, who was a coward before this, stood to face with despair instead of running away, much like Usopp in every fight. Even knowing the likelihood of failure, he still chose hope. The other Black Bulls as well would rather die than forsake their family, and their hope all came together to defeat the enemy that is despair. Now, we have to take something into consideration. Even though all these characters are expressing their perseverance, as fans, during this fight, it felt like all hope was lost for everyone there. I was certain the sea people were going to get killed, and I didn't think any of the Black Bulls personally were going to die because they are main characters, but for all intents and purposes, I didn't think they were going to come back and make the push that they did. But enter Asta, enter hope. Asta is the foil to Vetto and the symbol of hope. As such, it's fitting that Asta appearing on the battlefield gives the Black Bolt a second resurgence of hope and uniting them once again. Everyone who took a leap of faith in his absence would feel reassured in their actions after his arrival. Even those yet to join, like Finral, would feel compelled to join because of him. Asta, a boy without a shred of mana, is on the front lines fighting for his life against a monster who wiped out veteran wizards and is even stronger than the leader of the Eye of the Midnight Sun. That boy, that manaless boy, that detested member of society, that peasant, that orphan, that Asta, the boy born from nothing, born to become nothing. Asta, the boy who was told at every moment of his life since his birth that he didn't have what it takes. At every moment he was doubted, and every moment he was disrespected. Every time the world spits on his face, he gets the chance to turn away and wallow in pity and misery. Yet he takes the chance to turn and face the agony and tragedy of his life and fight on. He perseveres. He dares to believe and he dares to hope. That boy is Asta of the Black Bulls. The relationship between Asta and Vetto is a fierce juxtaposition of ideals and philosophies. At every moment they seem to be at clash. Even at a moment where Vetto first sees Asta as similar to him, he says, "He's like me." No, he's no beast. He's a demon who devours even despair. That acknowledgement was the moment that Vetto had reached his defeat. He acknowledged Asta, and in doing so, he acknowledged hope. Asta throughout the fight constantly battles Vetto mentally and physically, and even at the moment where he's the most powerless, Asta is in Vetto's grip and he can't move any of his limbs. He musters up the courage to do everything he can and bite Vetto's arm. The tenacity of Asta slowly but surely affected Vetto, who was unable to waver him. Asta was a beacon of hope not just to empower his fellow Black Bulls, but that light affected Vetto. It gave him the ability to compete with and eventually defeat Vetto. This was my favorite part of the battle, that he didn't just beat him with main character shenanigans or anything like that. It was his ability to motivate his friends to truly unite and use their teamwork to beat Vetto. In the climax of the battle, Asta chose his answer to the question of despair versus hope. He chooses to overcome and persevere through all his enemies and obstacles before him. Asta exclaimed the words that echoed throughout our souls. Throughout the battle, Asta told Vetto many times that his hope would overcome him, saying statements like, "You and despair are in the way of our dream." However, at the climax of the fight, when he has the last words to put an end to Vetto's tyranny, he chooses instead to combine them both. Asta sees Vetto and the idea of despair as one and the same. Vetto has embraced despair, and thus become it. This masterful writing allows Vetto to personify despair in everything said towards him by Asta. The personification of despair in one swift charge in the heat of battle, telling Vetto that not only did he lose, but he was wrong in his ideals to begin with. Despair had finally been defeated by hope. To these words, the once boastful and vindictive Vetto had no counter. He simply let out a blood-curdling roar. Asta thus replaced despair with hope, defeating it and Vetto. The repercussions of this battle were heavy. Asta would lose his arms, the siblings would be crippled. Although Asta's perseverance and vigor, both displayed in battle, and his optimism for the future, influenced the people around him to embrace that hope. In the face of adversity and hardship, Asta doesn't just turn away or succumb to his fears. He instead inspires others to overcome theirs as well as his. Like Vetto said, Asta is a demon who devours even despair. If you liked the video, like the video. If you disliked the video, dislike the video. Let me know in the comments if there's anything I got wrong or if anything you liked about the video. And take care.
この世には2種類の魂魄がある。一つはプラスと呼ばれる通常の霊。貴様が普段目にしている幽霊だ。そして今一つがフォローと呼ばれ、聖者、死者の別なくを襲って魂を食らう。いわゆる悪霊だ。ここまでで何か質問はあるか？
とりあえずお前の絵が異常に下手な理由から聞こうが。ああ！何しやがる！説明を続けるぞ、バロン閣下。